Greetings, my loyal subjects. I am Dalmatian Royalist, and as you may tell, this is my first video. In this video, I decided to delve into the topic that is commonly misunderstood, as many of them are, the French Revolution, its aims, its result, and its long-term impact. For understanding this topic thoroughly, I will firstly answer the most basic and significant question, of which many unfortunately don't know the answer, that is, what is the purpose of society? Not the best society pragmatically, nor the best ideally, but simply those properties that make up all societies, regardless of them being good or bad, ideal or pragmatical. My view, and I think the empirical one as well, is that all societies are bound by common property of having established peace and order. Not all of them have freedom, not all of them have equality, not all of them have prosperity, and they differ by their administration, constitution and composition. But they all share some, even if primitive, form of constitution and order. For if there is no order, or principles, or any form of administrative body, we cannot really call it a society, for there is no internal organization within it, and thus it lacks any cohesive force that maketh it one body that we can call society. Peace is also required, for if there be no peace, there is nothing holding man back from countering the constituted order, breaking it, and thus destroying the very cohesive forces that make society, one functioning body of people with constituted courses of interaction. That is, in other words, all societies share the common properties of maintaining internal peace and basic security. Everything else, the hierarchy or lack thereof, freedom or lack thereof, equality or lack thereof, and differences in administration and type of constitution cometh after. As great philosopher Thomas Hobbes said in the very beginning of his Leviathan, fear of oppression disposeth a man to anticipate or to seek aid by society, for there is no other way by which a man can secure his life and liberty. For obtaining such a society there must be a sovereign, who will uphold it, arbitrate, and keep order, be him a plurality, an oligarchy, or a single man. Of any sort, he must exist to protect the society from within or without and to keep the peace and order of it. When society creates such a body or a person, it becomes an exactly specified and codified society, a commonwealth, which I will now proceed for the sake of simplicity to call a realm. Predisposition of the existence of such a realm, or the sovereign whatsoever, is the threat that creates it, people whose ill intentions force them to break the constitution and with it the peace of society. These we call evil men. In fact, it is the nature of most men that is evil. One might argue against it, but it does not take long to disprove the counter-premise. For if the men are good, why is there crime? And if the crime is instituted by the learned behavior or the order that cometh from the sovereign, that will mean that the sovereign is evil, which proves that there are evil men. A sovereign is to argue that these are few in numbers. There are two arguments to counter it. First, that the crime still exists within democracies in which the sovereign is the major plurality, thus proving for majority of people to be evil, or simply to point out at any animal that is without sovereign, killing, slaughtering and devouring, without compassion for its own gain, those of its very kind, whilst those animals that exist under a sovereign, such as bees and ants, do not conduct themselves in the same way towards those of their own hive or nest, but do towards those that do not subdue themselves under the potency of their sovereign. This being said, the way to extract crime from society is for the sovereign to use coercive force, for which he needs a militia. Granted, militia can be raised without material wealth, through insurrection of subjects or through making them obliged to serve military in some way, either by land grants or political privileges or any other way really. Still, although the main corpus of the personnel may be acquired without material goods, this militia must be equipped and supplied, for which the sovereign must have a right to levy taxes. In other words, in order to subdue feudal lords, large mafia, angry mobs, common criminals or foreign invaders, the sovereign needeth to have material wealth sufficiently big, first and foremost bigger than any of its citizens, and that his revenue needs to ride proportionally through taxes. Now, we finally come to French Revolution. How and why it began. It began by people gathering and protesting, in the end deposing Louis XVI for levying too high taxes. And why would he levy too high taxes, you might ask? As it was proposed earlier, states levy taxes to fund militia. French militia was found by His Royal Majesty in a ruinous state, losing war after war, on land, sea, and in the colonies. And when the time came to deploy it within the borders of France, it was absolutely ineffective. Bastille, the fortress, was stormed for one day, and the fortresses are designed to withstand the exponentially higher number of enemies, yet this one couldn't hold itself for one miserable day. After that, revolutionaries just walked into Versailles, as if no army was under king's potency whatsoever. Furthermore, when time came for the new government to form and deploy its militia, it failed. Firstly, introducing conscription due to the lack of goods to prompt up a professional army, which was met with fierce opposition in the province of Vendée. Vendéans reasoned, rightfully so, that it'd be better if they paid higher taxes than to pledge their lives and leave their families headless. Not long after, the Girondins were deposed by Jacobins in similar effortless manner as did the Girondins depose the king in previous years. There came Robespierre and his regime of terror. However, I will not focus on it, rather on his financial policies. Parisian lawyer, confronted with the same issue as his predecessors, decided to solve them in a new manner, not much used after it caused the fall of the Roman Empire: the monetary expansion. Richard Munthe Brace provides us with the information that by 1795, value of the paper currency in France was less than 20% of its value 6 years before. As it is known, monetary expansion and currency value drops cause the interest rates to drop as well, creating an artificial demand, and in the end, number of malinvestments combined with the lack of incentive for savings and thus crashing number of producers, with them the production, and alas, the shortages occurred. According to the data provided by George E. Rudé, prices of bread increased by more than 3,000% by 1795, whilst wages increased only by less than 900%. Economic collapse was evident. Michael Lebowitz states that throughout 1792 and 1793, there were instances of mobs demanding basic necessities such as bread, sugar, and coffee. Out of this, we can now define the aims and results of French Revolution. The aim was to remove seemingly unnecessary taxes, but without them, newly formed government faced the same problem king faced when the bankruptcy occurred. In the end, the aim was not satisfied. Problems stayed, and the economy came out worse. The long-term story we should have learned from this is that you shouldn't judge the book by its cover, that is, high taxes with king's despotism, but instead all we have been hearing about is monarchy bad, proletarian dictatorship good. Before I draw a conclusion, I want to ask one final question. Why wasn't France able to finance an effective militia, and why were the taxes so high? Answer is debt. Who made the debt, you might ask? Louis XIV, but not without a reason. He was brought up an infant king. France just came out of one civil war, and it was on the brink of another. Religious, that is, not even counting all the noble factions warring against each other. The king, to stop it, took the loans to entertain nobility at Versailles, institute a vast bureaucracy in their stead, and improve an army for any potential religious violence. Some might say it was a bad economic decision. But what else was he ought to do? He had no power to levy taxes, and to leave the situation by itself meant even worse economic situation than that being civil war. Again, I'm going to reference Hobbes. For amongst masterless men, there is perpetual war of every man against his neighbor. No inheritance to transmit to the son, nor to expect from the father. No propriety of goods or lands, no security. If there is a civil war, anything you invest in is just a matter of time to be occupied, or stolen, or conquered, or, to use pretty tongue, redistributed or collectivized by an invader. Thus, if Louis XIV made a seemingly sound decision, he would fail to deliver basic functions of sovereign to uphold peace and order. The fact that the revolutionaries stormed the Bastille did not change the inevitability of the existence of that, but it did fail to perform the basic duties of sovereign to keep peace and order. As they were the new self-instituted sovereign, so in the end they were far worse than king's high taxes. Could this all have been avoided? Yes, if Louis XIV exercised the central authority from the beginning, not having to rely on debts and loans. In other words, in the long term, it is not the overwhelming king's power that caused the French Revolution, but lack thereof. Thank you for watching.